there's multiple areas within apologetics.
Mhm.
So could you kind of like go through some of the specifics that people can go into specifically?
Sure. And what I'm going to do is also tell you, make a suggestion for a book that somebody can read in that area if they're interested in that particular area. I was trying to think of, kind of the main different aspects, and I don't know if I got them all. So if you think of one I didn't think of, feel free to chime in here. But the first one I thought of was philosophy. So there are philosophical arguments for the existence of God. One of them is the Kalam, cosmological argument. That's everything that begins to exist has a cause. The universe has a beginning, therefore the universe had a cause. Things like that. So it's syllogistic logic and philosophical ideas and arguments for God. Another one would be the moral argument for God, and that would be, that only God can ground objective morality.
Right.
So those are two examples of philosophical arguments. So if anyone wants to wade into that area, I would recommend William Lane Craig's On Guard. And I think there's a separate one that's for students, which he specifically made for skeptics, I believe. So either one of those would be a good place to step into that. Secondly, there's the area of science. So in that area, we can learn all about evidence for design. So you have the design argument, the teleological argument, which is, which is the design argument. But you have different arguments that relate to that. So you have, say, the evidence of DNA, and DNA being information, and information being something that comes from a mind. So we have other information about the universe. There's scientific information pointing to the beginning of the universe, which points to a beginner. And one book, someone who's written a lot, especially on the area of evolution, is Philip E. Johnson. He has a whole bunch of books, but one that they could start with is Defeating Darwinism by Opening Minds. And you get kind of an overview of the different aspects of the evolution question. And then there's one by Douglas Axe called Undeniable that also makes a design argument. That one is also more on a beginner level, and there's way more difficult ones. If people are they're scientists, they want something more difficult. Signature in the Cell by Stephen Meyer is one that they could go for that. So you've got philosophy, you've got science, and next you've got history. And there are different things involved here. One would be the evidence for the resurrection. And for that case, I would go to Gary Habermas, and he's got a few different books on this. The case for the resurrection of Jesus would be a good place to start there. So you've got the resurrection, but you've also got archaeology. There's archaeological evidence for events in the Bible, and so I would kind of put that under the history section. So you've got those, and next you've got the Bible. So there's questions about the Bible. Is the text reliable? Was it passed down in a way that preserved the original text? That's one question, and that goes to something called textual criticism. And also, is it accurate? So historical accuracy and the transmission of the text are two areas that are related to the Bible. And a great book to start with this one is called Can We Trust the Gospels by Peter J. Williams. And he has all sorts of interesting things in there about why we can trust that the Bible is an accurate understanding of what happened and it was transmitted correctly and all of that. So next, you can see there are a lot of areas.
Yeah.
Whatever you're interested in. Just as an aside, when I was working on my degree in apologetics, I would always tell people, yeah, it's philosophy and history and science. And that's the great thing about it. Whatever you're interested in, there's a way that Christianity plays out in that field because Christianity is reality. So it affects every field and it helps us to understand every field. So the next field would be theology. I'm hearing a lot of this more and more. People have arguments against the goodness of God, or they don't understand how God could be good in light of certain things that happen in the Bible, or they don't understand how the Christian ideas fit together. So thinking clearly about theology is very helpful to explaining to people who God is and how Christianity works and why it isn't incoherent and why it makes sense and all those sorts of things. And then there's apologetics to responding to other religions. I forgot to give you a book for theology. So one book for theology, because what I found is that a lot of people, the difficulties they have with Christianity come down to two misunderstandings they have. One of them is they don't understand our sin. They don't understand the depth of our sin. And the other thing that they don't get is they don't understand the depth of God's holiness and righteousness. So that affects so many theological questions. So the book I recommend for this one is called The Holiness of God by R.C. Sproul. Okay, so now the next one, I only have a couple more here. Apologetics that are responding to other religions. And I mentioned this in terms of Mormonism. This is actually what people probably think of first because they've seen a lot of counter cult apologetics. Yeah. And I think you had Marcia Montenegro on your show. Yeah. So there are a lot of apologetics that actually will focus on a certain idea. So a certain philosophy or a certain religion like Mormonism or Islam or whatever it is. So that's another area. And one book I think is really good in this area is by Nabil Qureshi, and it's called Seeking Allah, Finding Jesus. So if you're interested in Islam, that is a great place to go for that. If you want one on Mormonism, there's tons there. One I just recently read was called Passport to Heaven, and there are different books with that title, so I'll give you the subtitle there. The True Story of a Zealous Mormon Missionary Who Discovers the Jesus He Never Knew. And that book doesn't go into a whole lot, if I remember right, of the historical problems with Mormonism, but it does talk a lot about the differences in our theology and how the grace that we experience as Christians is not what they go through, and their understanding of Jesus is not our understanding of Jesus. So if that sounds interesting, that was a good one. So we've got philosophy, science, history, Bible, theology, other religions. And then finally, there's just the general category of Christian worldview, which is thinking clearly about Christianity and applying it to the world. So that would include things like ethics. So maybe pro-life arguments would come under this category, or cultural apologetics, looking at the culture, examining what's going on in the culture, seeing how that relates to Christianity and whether it's wrong and why it's wrong and all those different questions. So did I miss anything? I can't think of another category.
I can't think of anything. That was a good overview. And especially like the books to go along with it to kind of dig into more if my audience wants to read more about it.
Yeah. And I just realized I forgot to give a book for that last one. So for Christian worldview and kind of the culture, I recommend Nancy Pearcey. She has a bunch of books. Total Truth might be a good, that's one of her main ones to start with. Another one that's very related to situations now about the body, like transgenderism or different topics about the body and sexuality, is called Love Thy Body. So those are a couple books by her, but she's got a whole series of books that touch on the culture and cultural ideas. She's fantastic. So I recommend her.